Okay, so I want to read a little bit from Erich Fromm. Erich Fromm has many books published. Some of them are not, they were not intended to be books. Some of them are, including the one that I'm going to mention. Originally, a series of lecture notes, maybe articles, essays, notes, drafts. Some of his works were parts that were excluded from an original manuscript. They were kind of remainders of one book, so they become the other side of that other book. They presented later as a book. So that's to have or to be and the art of being. The book that I'm going to read from, the volume that we are going to read together from, is called On Being Human, and collected, put together, edited by Rainer Funk, as many other Erich Fromm volumes. The distinction that I'd like to invite you to pay attention to here is the distinction between being an individual on the one hand and being an atom, being individualized, individuation, in contrast to being atomized, being an atom. So with these passages, hopefully I will share with you the context, the background. He sets the stage first, and against that stage he introduces these two concepts, that the binary, the opposition. And it really, the question is left with us. And if you'd like to share your thoughts on this, let me know. What do you think makes that difference? What do you think is the essential difference between being an atomized being versus being an individual? There are some hints, some directions that are provided in these passages and in the volume itself, but I think the question itself is very important. Some of my viewers, some of you, the viewers of my channel, have found me because of my reviews on Byung-Chul Han. And if you are fond of Han and Han's writing and his contributions, I think it's very likely that you will also enjoy and appreciate Erich Fromm. He shares a lot of the concerns, a lot of the styles of engagement with Byung-Chul Han, but the fact that he was earlier, the fact that he was rooted in psychoanalysis, critical theory, Marxist or Marxian ideas, makes him in many ways richer and more interesting, and he's not as aphoristic as Han. He gives us more to chew on. So maybe consider this, if you're new to Erich Fromm, consider this as a kind of invitation. And if you're interested in listening to me talk more about Erich Fromm on this platform, let me know. Okay, so let's begin. I'm going to share the texts on the screen as I'm reading, so we both have that. And if I happen to comment on a line, you will know where I am speaking and when I'm just reading. What began in the 19th century continued in the 20th century with ever-increasing intensity and speed. The growth of the modern industrial system, which led to more and more production and to increased consumer orientation. Man became a collector and a user. More and more the central experience of his life became I have and I use, and less I am. The means, namely material welfare, production, the production of goods, thereby became ends. The means became ends. Earlier, man sought nothing but the means for a better life, one that was worthy of human dignity. The natural bonds of family, solidarity, and of community dissolved without new ones having been found. Modern man is alone and anxious. He's free, but he is afraid of this freedom. He lives, as the great French sociologist Émile Durkheim has said, in anomie. By the way, Jonathan Haidt also pays a lot of attention to that concept of anomie in The Anxious Generation. Let's continue reading. He is characterized, modern man, is characterized by division or baseness, which makes of him not an individual, but an atom, and which no longer individualizes him, but atomizes him. Atom and individual mean the same thing. The first word comes from the Greek, the second from the Latin. The meanings that the words have acquired in our language, however, are opposed. They're opposed, not just different, opposed. Modern man hoped to become an individual. In reality, he became an anxious atom, tossed to and fro. It's important that promise of becoming an individual, I think, is still with us. That unfulfilled promise that leads us towards, in many cases, I think, towards being more and more atomized. Let's continue. The principles of accounting, of balance, and of profit were simultaneously applied to man and have expanded from economics to human life in total. Like the concept of balance sheet now in our time is kind of like a sacred text. Balance sheet is a sacred text. Is so important, so decisive, so influential. Man has become an enterprise. His life is his capital, and his task seems to be to invest this capital as well as possible. If it is well invested, then he is successful. If he invests his life poorly, then he is without success. He himself thus becomes a thing, an object. So my life, your life, we are encouraged, we are pushed to think about this precious life in terms of a capital to be invested, and to be invested well. And the value of this precious life is forgotten, and it's only thought about in terms of successful or unsuccessful investment. It is the investment that, in retrospect, determines the value. And without good investment, our life is worthless, apparently, according to this logic. Reading. We cannot lie to ourselves about this knowledge. When one becomes an object, one is dead. Even if one, seen physiologically, is still living. And if one is spiritually dead, although still physiologically alive, then one is not only subject to decay, but becomes dangerous to oneself and dangerous to others. There is a connection between this little passing thought and another work that develops this idea more fully, the Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, also by Erich Fromm. Let's read this passage. I love this one. It's so important. He says, today the primary issue is not the competition of people among one another and the antagonisms that result from the spirit of competition. Quite the contrary. People today form a team, a well-oiled group that works smoothly together, since this is the only way that large enterprises can function. So it is not the spirit of competition that's driven by capitalism. It is not that is the problem. It is the absence of conflict that Erich Fromm sees as a symptom, that things are wrong. There's something wrong with how we are operating. The absence of conflict, not because conflict in itself is good, but because conflict is an indication of individuality. It's an indication of difference. It's an indication of differences of opinion, differences of perspective, and the fact that we are more than these cogs in industrial machines, in corporate machines. Maybe another word for being atomized is a cog in a machine, but that is maybe that's not completely accurate, because first you need to be an atom, then you can more easily turn into a cog. A cog is someone whose individuality is taken away and is forced to perform in such a way as if they don't have an individuality in order to fit in order to become maximally functional. Let's read. Passage actually confirms or reinforces this idea. Modern industry and economics have effectively developed to the point that as a requisite for operation, they need people who become consumers, who possess as little individuality as possible, and who are ready to obey an anonymous authority while suffering from the illusion of being free and subject to no authority. And the last passage. One speaks of a mal de siècle and of malaise in order to characterize the distress in a world that is becoming increasingly atomized and more senseless. As Emile Durkheim has shown, it is also characteristic that the onset of suicide as a mass phenomenon has to do with this atomization of man and with a process whereby his existence becomes senseless. The onset of suicide as a mass phenomenon. And the death in its physiological sense, which follows an earlier death, which is turning into an object, basically. Okay, again, these passages were from relatively early on in the volume on Being Human by Erich Fromm. If you have any thoughts on this, I'd love to read them. Please feel free to share in the comment section. Otherwise, till next time.